guys, Nathan here. Welcome back to In the Sticks. You might be wondering why I got this helmet on my head. The other day I was sitting down and I had this thought. You know, the cool thing about having a YouTube channel is probably getting to talk about things that have interest to you that might be interesting to other people. So I thought today I'd take some time and talk about my military helmet collection, how it came into being, and just a little bit about military helmets in general. So we'll start off with this guy right here. This was my helmet back in Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was in OIF 3. Me and this guy have a long history. We were all over the country together, and it was kind of cool that I got to keep it after my deployment. It sat in the tough box for maybe, I don't know, 3-4 years. And one day I pulled it out and I got this idea in my head that it'd be pretty cool if I could have a collection someday to put up on a wall in some kind of man cave or garage and have World War I helmets all the way up to the current helmets that we use today. And I did it. So you can see over on the end there by the clock, I got some World War I helmets. There's some World War II helmets in between, Vietnam era. And I'm gonna take a moment just to pull a few down, tell you a little bit about them, tell you about the history of them. I'm by no means an expert, but I know enough to know a little if that might be something that you guys might be interested in. So stick around. So these first two right here, if you look at the one over on the right, that was the first helmet I got. The one in the middle was the second, and the one at the end is the third. They're actually in chronological order from when I picked them up. Taking a look inside this first helmet, you can actually see that it retains its original liner and its original chin strap, something that you don't always see in these old helmets because they dry out, they rot away. This one, the leather is still pretty supple. You can see there's a little bit of cracking in there where it's dried out a little bit, but you know, for a 100-year plus old helmet, that's really not all that bad. It's amazing that it's intact like it is. When you hold it up here, you can see the steel really isn't all that thick. These helmets, they weren't meant to be bulletproof. What they were really made for was to keep debris off of soldiers' heads. You think about the kind of warfare that the World War I soldier was in. A lot of artillery shells throwing up debris, and you had these brims here to kind of deflect stuff, keep it out of soldiers' eyes. So this was really the first time that soldiers were wearing steel helmets into combat. Before that time, they were wearing, they might have had leather helmets. The Germans still had some leather helmets, and they eventually moved to steel helmets as well. But this is the first steel helmet that the US and British forces ever wore into a combat situation. So the World War I helmets are pretty cool. I especially like this one that retains its original 3rd Infantry Division insignia. The one over there on the left, that is not original. I normally like to keep things original, but that one was completely roached out. A friend gave it to me. I decided to sand it down and paint it. That's a design you might have seen, I think, in parades like after the war. I've read that they use like odd camouflage patterns. I actually copied that off of one that I seen in a historical picture that had been colorized. I don't know if it's the right colors. I just kind of went with it. So that one's kind of my World War I helmet anomaly over there. Maybe some of you can tell me in the comments below if that's something that was or wasn't. Like I said, I'm no means an expert. I know enough to know a little. Now, before I move on to the World War II helmets, I want to show you this guy here. I got this super cheap. I don't know if it was an American helmet or a British. I've been told both. But if you flip it over, you can see the inside headliner here. It looks very similar to the World War I helmet, but it's slightly different. It also has a cloth strap instead of a leather strap. Some of the World War I helmets were modified for use after the war, and they were used on into early parts of World War II. But once World War II really kicked off, they switched over to the M1 helmet, a helmet that many of you probably recognize easily because it was used all the way up to the 1980s or 90s. So here's the first of my M1 helmets. You got just your regular non-marked helmet on the left, and then you've got an MP helmet there on the right. The MP helmet, I really like the MP helmet. I think it's so cool that it retains a lot of its, or all of its original markings on there. I'm going to take a bit here just to show you the difference between World War II shell and other shells that you would see on from the Korean period on out. If you take a look at the front brim on this shell here, I'm going to try and focus in on it here. You can see that there's a seam in front. So that's indicative of it being a World War II era helmet, because as from the Korean War production on out, they started to put the seams in the rear of the helmet. So that's one way to tell if you're buying an old shell, if it's World War I or later. Another thing is, when you flip it over, so they've got these bails right here. This is where the chin straps would have attached to. On the really early ones, you would see it just be like a straight bar. It'd be a welded fixed bail. I believe they went to these swivel ones here because they were less likely to break. And then inside the World War II helmets, this one still has a liner inside here. So they went away from the headbands that were like kind of riveted right into the helmet to an actual liner that you can pull out. I'm gonna have to set the camera down for a second to get it out here to show you. All right, so you can see right here, this liner, it's super light. It pulls right out of the helmet and it leaves you with just the steel shell. People use those steel shells to cook in and do whatever, but they could do it by taking their liner out there. All right, so just in front of my World War II M1 helmet, I've got two Vietnam era M1 helmets. If you're to take the helmet covers off of those, you would see that they have the seams in the rear versus the front of the helmet. And when you flip them over here, I'm going to just do a side-by-side. Sorry that the camera's kind of shaky here. So if you're looking here to the right, that's the World War II helmet shell, and to the left is the Vietnam shell. There's a little bit difference in the liners here, so that you can see that's kind of circular in the World War I shell and it pulled together, whereas this one's got a strap system that kind of interweaves itself there. So that's another difference that you might see between World War II helmets and Vietnam era helmets. The other is if you look at the chin straps here, or the straps here. So if you see the clasp on this one, you can see just how it kind of locks over the top of the, I don't even know what you call that, but it locks over there. This Vietnam era one, it's got like a little ball that locks into the strap there. So that is another difference that you're going to see. Another thing that you might see on earlier World War II helmets, aside of having fixed bails, if this one had fixed bails, you know what? It might actually. This one does have fixed bails. I didn't think this was a fixed bail helmet. Let me show you here. So you can see that those. No. Yep. So you can see that the bail is actually welded right in, versus on the other one it was able to pivot, kind of like this one would be able to. But aside of those fixed bails, you could also see that the strap would have been khaki tan instead of this greenish color, be kind of closer to the color you see on this helmet for the strap. The last difference I'm going to point out is probably kind of obvious. So the Marines during World War II, I know they had, sometimes they had full covers for the helmets like this, like a full cloth cover. But generally a lot of what you would have seen in World War II era is some kind of netting to stick foliage into to provide some kind of camouflage. Or there might not have been anything at all. But when you got over into the Vietnam era, a lot of helmets had this Mitchell pattern camouflage on here, and then these little slots that they were able to stick foliage into to further camouflage your headgear there, or your helmet. Then you've got this other one right here. This, I believe, was a training helmet, or it would have been a cover for a helmet during training. I think that's probably why it's numbered there. If I'm wrong, someone tell me. Again, that's my understanding. I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure that's a training helmet there. So let's get into the 80s and 90s here. I'm going to show you one more helmet. So as far as M1 helmets go, this one here was like the last hurrah of the M1. You can see the inside of the helmet liner looks a lot like the Vietnam helmet liner, but the chin strap actually has a little slot for your chin to sit into it. It wasn't just a straight strap anymore. And really that's the biggest difference, aside of, you know, there was a different camouflage pattern. This probably was used into the 90s. I know it well into the 2000s by some foreign militaries. A lot of National Guard units would have still had the M1 shells, but eventually we moved over to this guy, and this is what was available to me when I entered the military. This is a Kevlar helmet. Chin strap looks similar to the late M1, and the inside kind of looks similar to the World War II helmet. You go back to that circular, let me get some light in here. You got that circular webbing in there, and you've got a leather band that goes all the way around. One thing I remember as a soldier is wearing these for a long time, and this little webbing here would it just rub at your head, and you'd have like a bald spot after training with this thing for so long. So a lot of guys would put little foam donuts or washcloths into them. I almost wonder if the World War II soldiers would have had a similar problem with their liners. I'm guessing maybe they didn't, because these are a lot heavier, but I don't know. It would be interesting to know. Right here, you've got the helmet that I wore in Operation Iraqi Freedom. This little piece right here, this would be where night vision goggles would have mounted onto the front of it. And in the inside, man, was this a great improvement. So I gotta get this where there's some more light here. I don't know if you guys can see that. This is all nice like foam padding inside there. It's just a world of difference when you have to wear these things for a long time. But it velcros in. I'll pull one out here. Velcros in, velcros out, so you can clean it. The chin strap, you got a little more suspension for the back of the helmet here in the chin strap. Instead of snapping in, it has one of these guys and it just clicks right in. And a little bit of a lower profile on that helmet, which made it nicer for shooting rifles, because it didn't kind of bobble on your head as much. And it is also nice that it has an added suspension in it, and it just holds better to your head. So now you get into the Kevlar, and this one was actually called an ACH. These things actually do have some ballistic properties to them. They can, you know, take a couple pieces of shrapnel. I've seen ones that have been shot before, and it give you a little bit of a chance versus you going back to these old World War I era ones that were just meant to kind of protect you from falling debris. The very last helmet I have for you guys is one that I got when I was on active duty. I paid $5 for this, and I think it's some kind of airborne helmet. It's got a really weird liner inside there. I really don't know a whole lot about it, but I just kind of had to pick it up, put it in the collection. So, yeah. That's it, guys. I hope you learned something from today's video. I hope it was interesting to you. Maybe you learned something that you didn't know before. Maybe you're thinking about getting into collecting helmets, or you just were interested to click on this video and watch. I think it's awesome that there's a platform like YouTube to learn these kind of things from each other. And by all means, I want to learn too. If you know something about helmets that I got wrong, or you think that maybe I should know, let me know. I'm all about learning, and yeah. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on In the Sticks. One last thing here before I sign off. I want you to remember that each and every helmet up on that wall, every helmet you've seen in this video, at one point in time, all those were on the heads of veterans. And with Veterans Day coming up, I think it's important to remember they're the ones that have made the history of these helmets interesting. These are the people here that have served and protected our freedoms, and they're why we get to live like we live today. So to all those out there still serving, to those I have served with, to my brothers and sisters in arms, I salute you all. I love you all. Thank you for what you do.